Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm your host, Cheryl Hens. Very pleased to be joined tonight by a mother and son who have an amazing, just heartwarming, incredibly astonishing story to share. But I want to set it up here for a moment. If you look on the internet for the most common types of childhood illnesses or afflictions or diseases, the U.S. Center for Disease Control for the I should just look at my notes. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they have everything listed there, from the common cold to learning disorders to hearing loss, anything you can imagine. And in there, though, is also Tourette syndrome. And that is going to be what we're going to be talking about tonight. So they estimate that somewhere between 350,000 and 450,000 U.S. children and adults have Tourette syndrome. About 1 million U.S. children and adults have other persistent tic disorders. So how Tourette's or tic disorders manifest themselves in people, in particular children, because that's the focus of tonight's show, it will differ from person to person or child to child. But my guests tonight, as I mentioned, are a mother and son who they dealt with this when their son turned 7 years old. So I'm very pleased to welcome to the show, and I hope you join me in welcoming Beth Oswald to my right and her son to her right, Jonah Hines. And they overcame barriers like you would not believe. I think they almost seem impossible, but clearly they weren't impossible because of their amazing story. So as a 7-year-old child, Jonah was diagnosed with a severe form of Tourette syndrome, and emphasis on the word severe. And so Beth, you're the mom here. You're the one who lived through this along with Jonah and your ex-husband, his father. Mm-hmm. So talk to us. Tell us about how this started with Jonah.
It literally happened overnight. It was one evening, Jonah was getting ready, we were getting ready for bed, and Jonah was making weird movements, and Dad and I were, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I can't help it. I can't stop." And
like what was happening?
It was just unusual now tics, but shoulder shrugs and, just awkward. So
herky jerky kind of movements. Okay.
So we're like, well, stop doing that. Get ready for bed. Quit messing around. You're 7. So we assumed it was a tactic or, whatever. So put him to bed. He was still doing it and turned out the lights and kind of, he went to sleep, and I checked on him and he stopped. So the next day, his dad is a teacher where he went to school, and called me and said, he's doing this all the time during recess, so I don't think he's faking this.
Was he his teacher also?
He taught 5th grade, and Jonah was in 2nd grade at the time.
Okay.
But it's a small parochial school, so Dad was right there. The teacher was like, he's still doing this all the time. So we called his pediatrician and got him in right away, and the doctor's like, "I'm not exactly sure what this is." It was his pediatrician that we had seen for quite a while, and he, ironically, is the same pediatrician that diagnosed and treated the young lady quite a few years ago that had rabies, like I think the only survivor of rabies in Wisconsin, same pediatrician. So he left the appointment, looked up some stuff, came back with a book and said, I think this is a result of the strep infection that he had 6 months ago.
So he had strep throat?
Yep, he had strep throat in the summer, was on antibiotics, seemed to do fine, and the doctor said this is like textbook a trigger from a strep infection, that strep can go to your heart or your joints or your brain, and he said, I think this might be the result of the strep infection. So then from there, it was a whirlwind of doctors and blood tests, and they checked his titers in his blood.
Was that the next natural step, or was there no treatment that they could do at that time, like a course of, I don't want to say antibiotics,
well,
but
is
a course of something?
They checked his blood work, and his blood work was elevated. I'm business, not medical. So
who of us is medical these days? Although we kind of have to be sometimes.
Yeah. So they could tell that there was still strep something in his system. So they put him on a course of antibiotics, and it wasn't getting better. So they tried intravenous immunoglobulins. Remember those? That was awful. So that was a 9-hour infusion of...
9 hours? How many times a week?
It was once a month.
Once a month, okay.
But every time we'd have to get insurance to approve it because it was such an invasive process. But it was a 9-hour infusion of basically somebody else's immune system to try to counteract, and the tics just continued on. So
were they at least remaining somewhat stable at that point, or were they getting more and more frequent and more severe as time went on?
They were pretty significant, but they did get even worse as time went on. And
so those infusion treatments were nothing.
I mean, we tried everything. Give up gluten, give up sugar, try acupuncture. I mean, we'll try anything to try to help this.
Yeah.
And after a year of continual tics, then the CDC basically says that it's characterized as Tourette's rather than just a tic disorder. At this, I can't remember what they called it, comorbid. So it was all like not just a shoulder tic, but it was his whole body would tic and convulse.
So how did that affect you going to school, Jonah? Because I know you were young, I'm sure you have some memory of it, don't you?
Yeah.
And Mom can fill in the rest of what you can't.
Yeah, I like she mentioned, my dad was a teacher, which throughout my entire school was very, very convenient. But I think for the most part, all of my friends were pretty understanding, pretty accepting. There are a few times where, kids don't quite understand, and honestly, most adults don't really even understand.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, everyone was really accepting.
And you didn't get bullied because of this, did you?
No, I was in a very small class, a small school. Everyone kind of knew everyone.
Okay.
So yeah, it really wasn't too bad. It definitely could have been worse.
Yeah. Now, I've known some people with Tourette's over the years, and it manifests itself, like I said in the open, in different ways with everybody. I mean, some people, they kind of stutter a little bit as they're trying to talk. It sounds like they're stuttering, but then very quickly you can see it's not a stutter, it's something else. And then all of a sudden, and there's some head movements there too, and then all of a sudden they start swearing. And pretty badly too. Well, they don't swear pretty badly. It was pretty badly the way it was all coming out. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
They were swearing a lot. So yours was still sort of these weird movements that you were making and so forth.
Yeah. Tourette's is also actually characterized by the presence of at least one type of vocal tic, as well as motor tics. And let's see. So the swearing, the technical term for it is corporalia.
Yeah. Oh.
It's kind of the most visual and most well-known aspect of Tourette's, but it's actually not that common. I was lucky enough not to have that kind.
Especially with Dad being a parochial school
yes.
teacher. That was helpful in church, that was not.
Yeah.
But you had throat clearing and you'd grunt sometimes. And
yeah, my Tourette's has constantly, like pretty much since we started seeing it, it's kind of constantly evolved It's always been changing. I mean, even now, my tics are so minor. It doesn't happen too often, but every once in a while I'll notice something that it's like, oh, that's a new tic. That's something new that I haven't done before, and it'll stick around for a while until the next one comes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we were always watching to see here's what this tic is, then we figure how to live around it, and then it would go away, and it was kind of like, hold on to your hat, let's see what the next one,
So then what happened? Now you're 8, and things are still continuing. They're worsening in many cases. What happened next?
We were trying to find a neurologist that could really prescribe some of the medications, because Jonah's pediatrician said this is really beyond him. So we went through a couple different neurologists, some that we weren't really comfortable with. They not thrilled with medicating my child, but it was so significant that it was not a behavioral therapy issue. So we were able to find a neurologist in Green Bay that did a lot of different innovative research, and he was just a great fit.
And who was he?
That was Dr. Terrence Edgar at Prevea.
Okay. Yes, I remember you telling me about him when I interviewed you for the Oshkosh Herald office. Oshkosh Herald paper.
Yes.
The article that I wrote. It's been a long day already and a long week. It's interesting that I couldn't remember the name for sure of who you had said when I interviewed you for the article. But I've got some very dear friends, and I'll just say their first names. We don't need to put their last names out there. But Jennifer and Chip, and they've got two just, I can't even tell you how proud I am of these boys. They are just amazing kids. And I would have gladly taken them over as my stepchildren, stepchildren with air quotes, had something happen to Chip and Jennifer. But their firstborn, Connor, he was, I believe, younger than 7, but he was diagnosed with OMS, and I'm going to slaughter these names, so bear with me. I, too, am not a doctor. OMS is opsoclonus. You would probably know. Am I pronouncing that right, Jonah?
Man, I have not heard of that
All
word.
All right. So we're just going to say that's correct, and we'll just go with that. Opsoclonus myoclonus syndrome, but OMS for short, and that's a really rare disorder, and it usually affects infants and young children, and that's what he had, and they also saw this same
Dr.
pediatrician.
Edgar?
Yeah, the same neurologist. Is he just a neurologist for kids?
He's a pediatric neurologist,
Okay, yep.
and we had another friend whose son started displaying movement disorder, so we said, we love our neurologist, why don't you go see him? And I think we had an appointment with him not much after that, and he said, that child wasn't bad enough to see Dr. Edgar. I only take really significant cases. And we're like, oh.
Yeah, you don't know if you should think that's a good thing or not a good thing.
So,
well, they credit him with literally saving Connor's life.
absolutely.
And
Same sentiment.
Nurse, I think she said it was Nurse Wendy also. Does that sound right? Or maybe Nurse
Lisa.
Wendy went on to someone else when you
I
guys
think
were there.
it was Lisa.
I know I had the same, like, 1 or 2 nurses for at least 10 plus years.
Yeah. So what did Dr. Edgar do for you guys?
So he prescribed, and the problem is there's no true medication that's for Tourette's, so it's however people react. So he tried a ton of different medications, and we just, this one has this side effect, this isn't doing anything, this makes him sleep all day. Literally tried everything. And the ones that worked would make him so lethargic that he was just a puddle, and it was sad to see, this little boy who just wanted to stay in and take naps at recess rather than play with his friends. So in talking with Dr. Edgar, I hate drugging him. There's nothing else. And he said, well, there is one other option if you don't want to medicate him. And all the medications came with such negative kidney failure, liver failure.
Oh, yeah. And when you're talking
failure.
about a young child,
Right.
that's even more frightening.
Sure. He hadn't hit puberty yet. What's going to happen to him on all this medication? So he said that there had been research and a few cases in adults with doing a deep brain stimulation surgery, which is typically done on Parkinson's patients, which is usually adult. So we talked through the whole process and what that would look like and the risks. And really the risk was the surgery itself, and once healed, there's no side effect, there's no risk, because it's once your body's accepted the device, then you're good.
So there's actually something then that gets implanted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So Jonah has 2 electrodes implanted in his brain and a connector running down through his neck to a generator that's in his chest.
I actually brought a model of it.
A model of it. And
So we had to have it replaced a few years ago.
I'll just kind of, I'm not sure. There we go. That's the camera I'm on. So this is smaller than, this is about half the size of a pack of cigarettes, or maybe a little bit less. A little more, whatever. I don't smoke, so.
Yeah.
But, and so this is what it is. So what does this do then? Not this particular one, but thanks for bringing that. It's great show and tell. So what does that do?
So that's implanted right here in my chest.
Mm-hmm.
And actually you can feel a wire that runs up and down my neck. And then there's an even bigger bump up here, kind of at the corner of my head. And right there is where the wire actually delves into the skull. And then there are 2 depth electrodes that are constantly supplying voltage. We had to actually play around kind of with the doctors for a few years to get the settings right. You can have different kinds of fields, different settings and everything. And truth be told, I don't think they know exactly why it works. They just kind of know, like, this helps people with movement disorders. I know epilepsy, and then additionally OCD was pretty recently approved for the use of this device.
Okay. So what does it actually do?
Imagine the simplest way I think I can compare it is it's like a pacemaker for my brain.
Okay.
So the way Dr. Edgar described it is they're literally probably about the size of a pen, 2 skinny, long electrodes, and they have 6 points on each. So you can change the arc of the electrical current that's moving between the electrodes, and also the strength of the arc. So we spent a whole day there, and he would turn it on, and he'd say, okay, go do something for an hour, and we'd come back, and how does that feel? Well, Jonah can't lift his right leg properly, so let's tweak this, and they'd move it a little more, and then it would be like, oh, okay, nope, that's not working. So it was just kind of trial and error to find the right setting. And he described it that it's something with a dopamine, because you have too much dopamine flowing through your brain with Tourette's, and this actually kind of helps put up the guards around.
So that it's balanced out as much as possible, I guess.
Yep.
Well, I have to imagine that, well, I don't have to imagine because you and I have talked. I know how much this cost. But tell folks the story of, how your insurance company felt about this. Because it's not pretty.
Yeah, so when Jonah was 9 was when we made the decision to go ahead and move forward with surgery. And great, we'll run it through insurance, see what happens. And I mean, that was kind of our first trial with something significant running through insurance, and it came back denied. So,
And what was their reason for denial?
well, their term was it's not medically necessary, which is pretty much the blanket term, not medically necessary and not FDA approved for this purpose. So,
And probably for this young of a patient, too.
yeah, so that was a piece of it, as well as his age. So there's an appeal process, and we went through the entire appeal process.
How long did that take?
That took probably a year all in.
How many appeals, I mean, how many possible different places or people can you appeal this to?
You get 3 appeals,
Wow.
and that's it. So they send it out to peer review to have other neurologists determine if it's appropriate. But because there's medication that seemed to work, that was they weren't going to pay for surgery.
But it wasn't really working, and I'm sure you made that argument with them, that it wasn't really working because
Right.
it had him doped up where all he wanted to do is sleep. That's not an appropriate way for an 8 or 9-year-old child to be living. That's kind of ridiculous. So it's not working,
Right.
and it wasn't preventing the tics, right?
Exactly.
So I trust you made that case to them, and they said tough, basically.
Don't let my calm disposition right now fool you. I was mama bear at that time.
I'm sure.
And yeah, we just finally exhausted everything, and just as a family, like a big family with grandmas and grandpas and everybody, decided that this is what we need to do, and we'll figure it out and do it. So our church at the time was very supportive, and we had a bunch of friends that came together and said, hey, we're going to raise the money. So I'll back up and say, when we talked to the neurosurgeon, so we decided to stay here in Wisconsin because Madison was able to do the surgery on this young of a patient. And they said, but it's about $125,000 for the surgery. So we need you to pay half up front before we can do the surgery.
And of course, I'm sure you had that kind of cash
Sure.
lying around, right?
Yep.
Don't we all?
Yeah. So church friends and, childhood friends, we had tons of friends that came together and did fundraisers, and just through networks of people, we had people that we had no idea who they were from California sending in checks and
Wow.
notes, and it was
How did they
neat.
hear about this?
A friend of a friend, or
Wow.
we saw it on the news, or we read it in the paper, we just wanted to help. So it was really neat to see that outpouring of people coming together.
Sure.
In 6 months, we had the money raised. So I think it was my mom, Grandma, when they said, well, this is how much it is, Grandma said, just book the surgery. We'll make sure that it happens. Book the surgery.
Wow.
So we had the surgery booked, and in 6 months we were able to raise the funds for it.
See, and I had thought that I read somewhere that it was somewhere between $125,000 and $150,000, and maybe that was for some of the after, like the post-surgical stuff, or maybe that was for battery replacements, which we can talk about in a little bit. But nonetheless, $125,000 or $150,000, it's a lot of change to come up with in a relatively short period of time.
Dad and I were both working full time. We have another son that's 2 years younger than Jonah. Jonah's tics were so significant that Dad couldn't take care of him and teach, so we needed somebody to help out. So I'd take sabbaticals from work.
And what were you doing at the
I
time?
was a banker at the time.
Oh, okay.
So I was
Well,
banking.
could have just come up with that money simply,
Yeah,
Beth.
sure. In the vault. So, there was, just financial strain on us, and driving to Madison and doctors and Green Bay and doctor's appointments and everything.
Now, who was in Madison that you were seeing?
That UW Health, those were the
Okay.
neurosurgeons. So we
Okay.
also had to go through a process to get the hospital to approve doing a surgery on somebody this young as
Okay.
well.
But
So-
Dr. Edgar did the surgery, though, correct?
No,
Or
he was the pediatric neurologist. Then we had we had a pediatric neurosurgeon and a adult neurosurgeon.
Okay. All
So, yeah, we
Wow.
had a lot of doctors
Yeah, I
involved.
can only imagine. So the surgery was done then at what age?
I think it was 11.
11.
Wow. 4
Yeah.
years of this.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, too, it was, I believe you told me it was around 2010 when the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was just about to go into effect, or it just had gone into effect. There was some timing there with that. And you went to Washington to actually speak. And what prompted you to go to Washington to speak, and what did you specifically speak about? What was your message to Congress?
So part of the issue with the Affordable Care Act is prior to that, insurance companies could cover physical ailments at a different rate than mental or neurological issues like autism or neuropsych issues. So the Affordable Care Act put in the determination that everything has to be covered at the same or not at all. And what I heard was or not at all. So at least we had some insurance that was covering the doctor's appointments and some of the treatments, but I was afraid that with the ACA going into effect that was going to completely change. So that was my conversation on, here's a child with Tourette's that falls under this other segment, and he could not have medical coverage if you pass this the way it's written.
And you were there speaking primarily about your son only, but how many other hundreds, thousands of kids in this country have something? You know, I don't know what it might
Sure.
be, but any number of things.
Well, and Tourette's
that
is on
could-
the autism spectrum, so
Yeah.
really anybody with autism
Could slip
could
through
be
the cracks
affected.
because
And we do
of
have a
this.
friend who their insurance company will not cover their autistic child's
So
treatment.
so what? I mean, I know it worked out well for you guys, and I'm really glad that it did. But this is a problem. You know, if these things aren't covered, you're going to have a lot of people, children in particular, slipping through the cracks. And, you know, how do they get to lead a normal childhood? How do they get a decent education? How do they get to be productive members of society as they get a little bit older when they're falling constantly through the cracks? Or they've fallen so deeply through the cracks at the very beginning process that they're so far down in the cracks that they can't crawl up and
Yeah.
get out, you know?
And this is not your fault. It was very emotionally and mentally draining as a parent. So, but I don't know, I take after grandma and that I'm going to continue to fight until my last breath. But for parents that don't have that or don't know how to advocate for their kids, I know that breaks my heart to think about
Yeah.
a parent that just doesn't have it in them to advocate for their child.
Well, you know, you talk about becoming mama bear. My friend with their son, I mean, she's not always a fighter, but boy, you know, it's like so many people. They won't necessarily
Yeah.
step up in other situations, but boy, when it affects their kids,
Yeah.
hell hath no fury as a mother who's being told, or a father too, who's being told, we're not going to pay for this, or we're not going to support this, or no, you can't have this done, or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, so what happened were you on Capitol Hill that you spoke, or where were you in Washington?
Yeah.
Right there
I
on
was
Capitol Hill.
right there.
Well, look at you go, Beth.
Yeah.
But something happened when you were in D.C. With Discovery Health. Tell us about that. Because what a stroke of luck
Yeah.
that was, that they are, it's almost like divine intervention, right? I mean, you're there talking about this and making an appeal to lawmakers, especially, you know, about your child, and all children really. And there along comes Discovery Health, you know, and
They
so.
were there to film something else, and I can't remember what it was, but heard me speak and thought this would be cool to do a program on, and talk to me. And they knew, I think that was in April, and knew that his surgery was scheduled for June. So they let me get your number. We'll call you later. And I'm like, okay, sure.
And that was what year?
That was 2010.
Okay,
so
2010.
that was just before his surgery.
April and June. Okay.
So they actually called and
They
said,
did call?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'd like to do a story on Tourette syndrome and how it affects typically firstborn males. And
Isn't that interesting?
yeah, and they did. So they came and filmed and did a whole bunch. They went to your school and
Yep, having a camera crew follow you around all day at school. I was the coolest kid at school for like 2 weeks.
You were the
For 2
first
weeks.
reality show in the
Yep.
Fox Valley.
yeah, that could be true.
But so it was, what, a 3-part documentary, a 4-part, 2-part, what was it?
They had a couple different people that they featured, and it was interesting because you could see people with different treatments. Obviously, mine is one of the more radical treatments that you can get. And they were able to, they filmed before I had the surgery, so they were able to get a lot of footage of really just what life was like for me, both at home, at school, wherever I was. And then they came back a few months after my surgery to film, and it was awesome getting to talk to them about, I mean, even at that point, you know, we hadn't quite worked out the kinks with the settings, but even at that point, it's like you flipped a switch. My life was completely changed, and
Yeah.
they got to document that process.
And they were in the operating room. So it was nice
Oh.
because I got, like, every half hour, I'd get a text from them, from Bergen, saying, hey, it's good, everything's good. So it was,
How cool.
I think it was like a 9-hour surgery.
Oh.
So,
I would have been a nervous wreck.
yeah.
But getting those texts, they were something of a little buffer for you.
And they
to-
would send little pictures. And so it was, yeah, it was nice to at least have the updates throughout the entire thing.
Sure. And a lot of people can't handle seeing graphic texts. You know, they can't deal with the image, or they can't handle blood or whatever. How did that affect you, if at all?
I think we were so, even the day of or during surgery, my mom's like, how can you be so calm? And I'm like, this is what we've been waiting 4 years for this. It's finally happening. So I wasn't
Yeah.
too freaked out. It was like, okay, this is it. And, you know.
This
so-
is the one shot, the
Yeah.
only shot really, at making a tremendous difference and really giving you the best kind of ordinary life that you should have by all rights. So, with the camera crew following you around, how long did they follow you around, Jonah?
Maybe 2 weeks at a time, 2 or 3 weeks, give or take.
Yeah.
Did that, I know you went to a small parochial school in Fond du Lac School District, or Fond du Lac County, and so how did your fellow students, did they think that was pretty cool? Because they were tremendously helpful to you. They pushed you around in a
Yep.
wheelchair. You know, they were, for kids that young,
Yeah.
they were pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
our
so I'm
my-
sure they liked it being on TV, for the wrong reasons, of course, but they kind of got something out of it, I'm sure.
Yeah, my friends, like I said before, they were very accepting. You know, at first they were accepting, and that continued. And eventually, as they kind of got more familiar with it and everything, they started being more helpful. And I mean, we're talking about 8, 9, 10-year-olds that are dealing with another kid their age that is just acting absolutely crazy. There's actually one girl in my class, Berea, who she was in charge of, I would occasionally dash for the door, and she was in charge of being the linebacker and stopping me. That was her unofficial job. And there were so many people like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, that really was an amazing group of kids.
Yeah. Well, you, Beth, had told me that his share in the classroom, because he kept falling and so forth, your chair, Jonah, was a beanbag chair.
Oh, yeah. I had a beanbag chair for a while.
Hot pink beanbag chair.
Yep.
I mean, everything that you went through, I just, like I said in the opening, this is probably one of the most amazing stories that I've ever heard, or been in close contact with. You know, we hear about miracles all the time, and this wasn't necessarily a miracle, but, you know, God gave these doctors such great talent and knowledge that they were able to pull this off.
Do you remember asking Dr. Leland?
I don't, but I was told I was just about to go under for the surgery. Like, I could feel the anesthesia, and at that point I was getting, pretty scared, understandably. And I asked the doctor, who was incredibly experienced. I was laying on the hospital, and I asked him, "Have you done this before?"
Well, you also asked him if he believed in God.
Oh.
And he said, I mean, that was, as they were putting happy juice in you. And he said, absolutely, and that he prayed that night, and he just felt really confident that this was all going to work out for the best, and
And so at surgery time then, what role did Dr. Edgar still play? Was he in communication with them, or did his role come back into being post-surgery?
Yeah, he made the recommendation on you can go to Johns Hopkins, you can go to Mount Sinai, or you can go to Madison. Madison it is. So he helped us pick out the neurosurgeons, and then he stepped away, and then we continued on with him for the adjustments of the device.
Okay.
So.
All right. And, pre-surgery, you had to get an aide for Noah in school, right?
Yep. Because he couldn't write. He would flip over around. So he couldn't test, basically. Physically, he couldn't test. But cognitively, he knew his stuff, and he was listening and paying attention. So because we were in a parochial school, we couldn't, at the time, I'm not sure if things have changed, but we couldn't get a public school aide to come in and assist. So, I mean, that was another strain on the, finances.
Probably because of how they're paid and any kind of contract that they're under.
Yeah.
So you had to pay for that too.
So we paid for that.
And your insurance didn't, once again, cover that either?
No.
Great.
No. Yep.
Don't you just love it? So let's talk about, I can't believe that we're running so far out of time here. I mean, it seems like we're so far behind, and yet we've got about 18 minutes left, and I've got so many things I want to talk about with you guys. But so let's talk about where you're at today, because, again, this is such an amazing story. Today you are how old?
I am 23 years old.
23 years old. You had surgery at age 11. So 12 years ago. Tell us about graduating high school and then where you went from there.
Yeah, so by the time that I hit high school, I was pretty much a normal kid. You wouldn't really know that I had Tourette's or anything wrong with me unless I told you. I moved off to college. I had my own car and everything, both of which doctors had kind of suggested that very high likelihood I wouldn't be able to do.
Drive, leave the house, right, without the surgery. Yeah.
So I went to the Milwaukee School of Engineering for biomedical engineering, And, you know, kind of as I was deciding my career path, I thought, like, wouldn't it be cool to work with something like this, work with something like deep brain stimulation? And kind of as I was going through, I realized, you know, that might be difficult to attain right out of college. But then my senior year, as I was looking around for places, I managed to get an interview at a place called AdTech. And right now, I design and I work on neural electrodes for epilepsy monitoring. So it's not quite the same thing as I have, but it is a movement disorder. It's neurological. It's brain electrodes. I mean, I couldn't be happier with actually where I landed.
Because you're getting to work with people who obviously have some kind of a disorder, very much like you had. May not be the exact same thing, but they need stimulation from objects like that right there. Whether it's to slow things down or pick things up, whatever the case might be, they need that kind of therapy or treatment, if you will. But what amazes me about this is, and I can tell you're somewhat shy about this, you're not a boastful sort of person, which is good, but you should boast about about things when they deserve boasting, and I think this does. You graduated college, got a job, and got married within, what did your mom tell me, within 3 months of each other?
3 weeks.
Yeah, it was less than that.
3 weeks of each other?
Yes.
Oh my God. I didn't realize it was 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Holy
cow.
Yeah.
I started like very part-time in my job. I was kind of doing trainings and getting the lay of the land.
Pre-graduation.
Pre-graduation. And then, I graduated college, had tons of fun, like, seeing all my friends go, seeing where everyone's going. And then, I got married very shortly after to Tiffany. She's my high school sweetheart.
Oh, wow. Well,
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
On everything. I mean, as you sit here with us tonight, I can't tell. I mean, if I didn't know it, I would not know that there was any single thing wrong with you at all. And I know when you and I talked, you said that you still do have some tics, but now they're, sort of presenting in a different kind of way. Like you told me, I think you said you do a lot of different kinds of stretches.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, do you stretch in weird positions? And
So one of the comorbidities with Tourette's is OCD. And that's definitely one that I have.
Mm-hmm.
So my stretching is, I think at least, it's kind of hard to tell, but my stretching is a bit more OCD related. But yeah, I have 2 or 3 stretching sessions a day. This actually kind of started a few months ago from an injury, but it got to the point where I can actually do the splits now. I will boast
wow.
about that.
Wow. Well, that's something I can't do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can boast about that.
And it's not all downsides.
Yeah. And you also told me that so how long have you been at AdTech?
A little over a year and a half, I
Okay,
believe.
so in that amount of time, you told me you got to go to, was it New York?
Yeah, it was.
New York City, and see 3 brain surgeries from start to finish. And they were, implanting similar devices as what you have? Not for necessarily the same thing, but they were implanting some kind of device to help with these folks' brain and whatever affliction they had, right?
Yeah, and it was actually Mount Sinai that my mom mentioned. So it was one of the few hospitals that actually does pediatric deep brain stimulation.
Oh, so these were pediatric patients.
I got to see one pediatric patient.
Okay, and 2 adults.
Yep.
So,
And they do short-term monitoring.
Okay.
So they're looking for which parts of the brain specifically are damaged, are causing like their symptoms and everything. So, obviously if you're getting brain surgery, like your condition is very, very severe. So these were people that were really struggling, and it was really cool to get to see how our products were able to actually help them like get their life back.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure that it helped you to see how these surgeries go, because I'm sure you don't have a lot of memory of it from having been at such a young age. I've had surgeries as a senior citizen, shall we say, or shortly before this, and I don't necessarily remember things. So for a child to be able to remember things, at least you get to actually see something similar being done. And so you, as you described it to me, you are, so you're a biomedical engineer. You are doing a little of creating of these types of products, but you're also working on, did you say it was working on regulation, on the regulation end of things?
Yeah, there's a lot of FDA kind of compliance things that we have to work on as well. But actually, pretty much from the beginning of summer to now, and this will continue, I've really been in new product development mode, which, I mean, that has always been my dream, is to make my own medical device. And that's exactly what I'm doing now. I did not think that I would get to this point this quickly.
Yeah.
So I hopefully will actually be able to go to a hospital and see the technicians and the surgeons actually using this product that I came up with.
And in addition to that, you're taking products that AdTech has had for 20, 30 years, and they haven't had any real updates to them. And so you're working on trying to update them, bringing them into the 21st century and that kind of thing. It's got to be super, super rewarding. And Mom, for you, you're holding back tears, I can tell.
Yeah.
Because this is an amazing story. And like I said at the beginning, this is heartwarming. And I think the message that it should send to anyone out there, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this on the radio, whatever the case may be, however over what medium you're hearing or seeing this, I think the message should be that we should never let anything deter us. If you're finding a door closed here and you're finding a door closed there, keep looking, because you'll either find a door that will open, or God will have left a window open, maybe just a little crack that you can stick your fingers through and open it up.
Yeah.
And I think that's the message that it sends to me. What message would you folks want to say to people who are listening or watching?
I prayed for God to take this away from Jonah, and it just let me be the one to be sick. I did not want my child to be dealing with this, but if I would have taken that away from him, he probably wouldn't be doing what he's doing. And I think your brother is also doing what he's doing as a result of, everything. So both boys are doing amazingly, and I think this is what really help them find the path that they have. So,
and well, let's not let your younger brother out of this completely. What's his name?
Micah.
Micah. Okay, Jonah and Micah. Definitely, biblical names there. And what does Micah do?
So when Jonah was going through the heat of all of this, Micah was always kind of his protector. The little squirt was the one who would stop him from getting hurt, and he entered the military. So right after high school, he joined the Air Force, and he's in special operations. So he's still a protector.
I was going to say, so now he's protecting all of us.
And he's not tiny anymore, and he's much bigger than Jonah.
Yep. People always said he'd get bigger than me, and I did not believe them. But I think as soon as I left for college, shot way up.
Barely recognized him when you came home, right? Well, please thank him for his service also when you speak to him. Is he based stateside here?
He is for a few more weeks. So he's going to be deploying to Eastern Europe as of December 1st. So
Well, at least that's not as dangerous a place as he could be going, so. But one never knows in today's world, especially given what he does. But, God will be watching over him, I have no doubt, just as he's watched over your entire family through all of this. How much younger is he than you are, Jonah?
2 years.
2 years, okay. Yeah, I thought you had mentioned that before, but I wasn't sure. And so I guess I want to talk just a little bit about your new role.
Sure.
But is there anything else that you want folks to know about what you've been through, about how you're helping people by what you're doing right now? Any encouragement for parents who might be going through anything like this, not just necessarily with Tourette's, but any type of thing where they're running into insurance roadblocks, not being able to get their children help? I know that's a loaded question there.
That's a lot.
But
Jonah had to have his battery replaced, which is how he has this. So,
okay. So that's the battery, or that is the device that's implanted?
This is the device that's implanted in my chest. It acts as a battery to power the electrodes.
Okay,
that
so
are
it's one.
Yep.
It's two things built into one. Okay, and what does that cost to replace that?
I think just under 40,000.
Oh my word!
So insurance denied it again because they said it's not medically necessary.
Come on, after all this,
and it's not FDA approved for that purpose. So now I've had enough time to do more research, and I was able to fight this appeal a little more strategically, and found out FDA does not approve devices, they approve drugs. So the fact that it was not FDA approved for this purpose, the FDA doesn't approve devices for any purpose. So I was able to fight them with their own rationale.
kind of using their rhetoric against them.
Yep. So I wrote this long appeal and sent it off to everybody that I could find, and I just started calling and talking, and I sent it to the head of the insurance company in Georgia, and we got the denial, again, the final denial, and fine, we'll just, okay, again,
After all of
found the
this,
money
and
the
they
first
still
time,
want
we
to
found
deny
it, yep.
things. That's incredible to me.
So, but then a couple weeks after that, I got a phone call from somebody at this major insurance company and said, I want to talk to you about your appeal. And I said, well, you're about 2 weeks too late because the final appeal had just been denied. And he said it landed on the president's desk, and they gave it to me and wanted me to read it. And he said, we've decided to overturn the denial, and we're going to approve the surgery. So approve the payment for the surgery.
Okay. So every time you have to have that replaced, it's another surgery, of course. So that's why it's around 40 grand?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not just the device alone that's 40 grand. It's the device and
surgery
implanting
and
it.
everything.
And how long does a device like that last, typically?
I think if I had 2 replacements so far, I think they've lasted about 4 or 5 years each. I think I'm actually due for a new one soon. Yeah. So I mean, hopefully number 3 isn't quite so much of an uphill battle, but from what it seems like, it hopefully is getting easier for us.
Well, and now they've set a precedence.
Yes,
exactly.
So
From here on in, there shouldn't be an issue, because then you can really use their logic against them. Hey, you set a precedent right here.
Right.
So let's knock it off.
Hopefully.
So, okay. Well, thank you for what you're doing. As a biomedical engineer, I'm so impressed with you because you're a smart guy. And I think that you were probably smart even before all of this happened, probably even before Tourette's even started to bother you. I think you were a smart guy. I just get that sense about you. But thank you for doing what you're doing, because you are going to benefit so many people in the long run. And, Beth, thank you for sharing the story with us.
Yeah.
Because it is, see, now you're going to get me teary-eyed here, and I don't typically do that on air. Although the older I get, the easier it seems to do. Keep us posted, and if we need to get you guys back on again, we will. But I thank you for sharing your incredible story with us. I can't think of any other word other than amazing or incredible, and just very inspirational, I think. I think you should tell your story to, there's a lot of religious publications out there, and I think you should share it with one of them. And who knows, maybe I'd write it. Who knows? But let's talk for our couple of remaining minutes here. You are the new executive director of the Oshkosh Area United Way. You've come from the Christine Ann Center Domestic Abuse Center prior to that as their executive director there. So in your work in the nonprofit field, you've been fighting. You've been fighting a lot for underdogs and for people who, need some help, some guidance, whatever the case may be. What made you leave banking and go into nonprofit work? Or is that another hour show?
Midlife crisis? I don't know. I think it was just I felt like I was good at banking, but it didn't have the passion. I think, I spent so much time fighting for him, and now that was done, and now, I don't know, maybe I just like fighting for stuff.
Yeah. Well, these are good causes to fight for, you know. Everybody, people who are victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence, they need help.
Yeah.
Right from Jump Street, they need help, and so you were providing that help when you worked there, and now you're with United Way, and you've only been at United Way since earlier this year, right?
September, 2 months.
Okay, couple months. And how's that going so far?
So far, so good.
And I know we talked a little bit about how it differs from some of your other nonprofit work. And I think what you said to me was that, you were able to be a little bit more strategically based in this job because things didn't just happen that you wouldn't necessarily be expecting to happen.
Right.
Is that...
At Christine Ann, I felt like I was always doomsday prepping. I was always prepping for the worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. For the most part, some of the worst case scenarios unfortunately happened, but at least then we were prepared for it. Yeah. And it just got exhausting for always trying to prepare for the worst thing that can happen. So after almost 7 years, I was kind of ready to move on. And it's easier to be strategic and forecast in this kind of position. Yeah. So,
Well, I know you're going to do a great job.
Thank you.
So congratulations on the new appointment, and congratulations on everything that you're doing, and thank you both very much for being here. And that's really going to pretty much do it for us. I do just want to say that we are always looking for people to volunteer on the show. You just need to be 16 years or older, 4 to 5 hours a month, and we tape basically every other Thursday. It is a volunteer thing, so we don't pay, but you don't need to have any experience. You will get trained, and it's a lot of fun, and you get to meet a lot of wonderful folks like Beth and Jonah. So let me know. The email address is there. It's ionoshkosh@gmail.com, or you can call 920-209-7387. So thank you again to my guests, and thank you for watching and for listening, and we will see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.